What's going on, everybody? This is Jerome Moore, host and creator of Deep Dish Conversations. And firstly, I want to say thank you for all love and support, and thank you for exploring the perspectives of social change with me on this platform. I want to encourage you all to like, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube and on your favorite podcast listen platform. And make sure you give us a 5-star rating if you're loving the Deep Dish Conversations. I appreciate all of the support again. I hope you all enjoy this episode. Briana, welcome to the platform. How's it going?
Yeah, things are going okay. I mean, it's okay as they can be in these times. But
Right.
yeah, I'm doing good. Thank you for the invitation.
Hey,
Happy to have this conversation.
Everybody was like, "Hey, you gotta talk about this." So I was like, "Well, we gotta make it happen."
Yeah.
So the universe, aligned everything together, and then we had Denzel on here, plugged us in. Shout out to Denzel. And yeah, this will be interesting because because I am uninformed in a lot of ways, I believe.
Okay.
And so I think it's many of us, especially men, about reproductive justice. And so you finna school us all and drop some gems and knowledge and be a myth buster. But before we get into it, just tell us about, a little bit about who you are, what you do, your organization that you work for, and we can get straight into it.
All right, cool. Yeah, so my name is Briana Perry. I'm originally from Memphis, but I've been in Nashville a little bit. I initially came to Nashville to go to school at Vanderbilt, and that's actually where I learned about reproductive justice. I was a women's and gender studies, sociology double major, and I just started reading about it, and I think it was really impactful for me because I don't know, it was just kind of thinking about my life and my experiences. I come from a single parent household, my mama, being raised by a black mama and those experiences. And so, reading about it really stood out to me. And at the time, I just, was just thinking about it in a sense of this is maybe this is just theoretical. I was learning about organizers and activists, but I didn't know that was a role for me, that was possible for me. And so it wasn't until when I moved back to Memphis in 2013, the next year, I actually got connected with the organization I work with now, Healthy and Free Tennessee. So during this time period in 2014, it was really hard year. So one, that spring, a really harmful bill went into effect, went into law. And so Tennessee became the first state in the country to pass a law that essentially criminalizes pregnancy outcomes, but it criminalized pregnant folks who use substances during pregnancy and gave birth to babies who exhibited this syndrome. It's called neonatal abstinence syndrome. Wow. And it's very treatable. It's essentially treating withdrawal. But, this was something we were this is a public health issue, and it's being criminalized. And I think that really just blew my mind.
And so I didn't know this.
Yeah.
But there's this narrative that happens that you see and it's portrayed in movies and in places like that many people believe that women shouldn't do certain things like smoke cigarettes, do any type of substances that could cause harm to the baby. And so maybe a lot of people was criminalizing women personally and not even knowing it. And now, to find out it's actually it's laws, policy in place that actually can is it could it lead to jail time? Could it lead to the kids being taken away from the parent? Those are some of the consequences?
Yeah. So just to speak to what you saying about in movies, what we see. Right. So one, those are just thoughts and stuff out there.
Right.
And if you think about the research, so first of all, the effects of alcohol and smoking is different than the effects of, let's say, you smoking weed or something like that. And I think people just kind of group all those things together. So that's one thing. Okay. But with that, I think that a lot of times we're not asking the right questions. Okay. It's one, like again, like some of these substances, like there have been a variety of people who for pain. Pregnancy is a lot.
Right,
I've never been pregnant, but like still, like for pain management things that come up, like marijuana can help with that. But there's this stigma around it, and again, because we group all these things together, and thinking about the '90s and the crack epidemic, crack babies, which scientists have shown that like this whole crack babies, that was just a myth. That was just racist.
Wow.
Yeah, like there weren't these long term effects that people were saying, and so all of that has been debunked. That has been seen as like these weren't rooted. These are rooted in racist stereotypes.
Wow.
And so that's something. And so like just to show how like our views and biases and perspectives, like how that like lead to policies, because that's what it is really.
Propaganda stereotypes lead to policies.
Exactly. And so with this particular bill that passed in 2014, that kind of got me really started in the work, it did lead to jail time for some women. So the arrests were mainly concentrated like in East Tennessee, and then also in Shelby County, area, Memphis, where I'm from. And so it wasn't like they didn't experience prison time. It wasn't like they were like going to jail or were sentenced to like 3 to 5 years. But again, going back to like, why are we responding in this particular way? Like, why are we ensuring that people have access to treatment? When you think about, and this is something that came out in 2014, when you think about the amount of treatment centers, more have come about, since 2014. But at that time, it was slim. And then on top of that, if you have children and thinking about like treatment for you and then being able to bring your children, there were, not really any treatment facilities that allowed that. And so again, all of this in like poverty, all of these systemic issues on top of that. But to answer your question around like, do people like lose their children because of substance use? Oh, for sure. And so that's something that like my organization, and also like me personally, I'm really passionate about, like with like these issues like criminalization. And we always talk about criminal justice and reproductive justice are deeply connected. Like there's like so many connections and like alignments, like what, the criminal justice and what's wrong with that system is so connected to reproductive oppression and what we're fighting against.
Do you believe, okay, this is good. So between I say criminal legal system and not criminal justice
you're
system.
right.
Personally.
I say criminal legal system, but I know some people,
Justice is different for everybody, but I'm gonna call it legal. Criminal legal system, but we talking about the same thing. Criminal justice, criminal legal. Some people say criminal punishment system.
Yeah, it is the criminal punishment system. So you're right. It's no justice.
You're right. However you want to chalk it up and cut it. Let the viewers and the listeners decide. Do you believe reproductive justice gets the attention that it deserves?
No.
Okay. Do you believe because of that, is there a gender bias kind of reasoning on why? Because like we're talking about predominantly women being affected, like reproductive, right? It's women, right? And so do you think that has a lot with, okay, why maybe I didn't hear much about it or don't hear much about it unless like an egregious law is really passed, and then that's kind of when you start hearing like, oh man, like they not allowing like abortions, in certain states after 6 weeks or whatever, and then like it kind of fades away.
Yes, I definitely think there are a lot of like systemic and structural reasons why it doesn't get the attention that it deserves. And that is so frustrating in a lot of ways because first of all, when we think about like reproduction and that impacting like so many genders, do want to say like, is, cis women, other like genders, trans folks, want to make sure we're including them in this conversation and their experiences with this issue. But as we think about like just from the beginning of history, like who's thought to be responsible for like one having a child and then raising a child, taking care of the child, and that has been put on women, people who are feminine or been feminized. And so because of that, and because we live in this sexist, patriarchal society,
Right.
like those issues that like impact those folks have always been, ignored and erased.
Right.
And so like now, there are different conversations and it's like all in the media because like what's happening with Roe v. Wade. And I think, like a little bit in our generation, like thinking specifically about Roe v. Wade, because like that's something, that was in 1973. We weren't even alive. Like some folks haven't thought about it,
Right.
but I think it still comes back to like because of the society in which we live and how like women in general, gender oppressed people, how they're treated, how like we don't like people don't get the resources they need, to take care of children. All of that is why like it doesn't get the attention.
And that is why, as a man, as a black man especially, I tend to not talk about it because I really believe it's a conversation and a role that women should be leading. Because you all are the one doing the reproducing in this country. But with that being said, is there a role that men can play in reproductive justice?
Oh, absolutely.
Outside of creating racist ass, biased ass policies, at the state legislature.
Yeah. And that's the powerful thing I would say about the reproductive justice framework. So one, I will say, because I think we, hear reproductive stuff today, we like, one go to like, oh, okay, like, coat hangers. I mean, some of that's coming back up, or like people, Handmaid's Tale, stuff like that.
Right.
And those pictures and images. But reproductive justice is its own framework. So like, I think people like kind of like use the words like interchangeably and like, oh, reproductive rights, reproductive justice, the same thing. It's not.
Okay.
So reproductive justice is a movement that was started by black women, a group of black women in 1994, because they wanted to push for a more expansive way of thinking about reproductive and sexual health. So they were like, okay, one, everybody keeps talking about choice. Like, you get to decide your choice. And they were like, well, what does that mean when we live in communities that, all of this policing, we don't have jobs, we don't have adequate housing, we don't have education, we don't have the resources we need in order to thrive for ourselves, let alone have children. We got to be talking about those things because all of those things impact our reproductive life. And so with that framework, it includes so many people. So it is thinking about, yes, the capacity to reproduce, but also, too, like, what if you don't want to have children? That's these conversations around contraception and abortion. But the last tenet, and all of this is framed around human rights, is saying that we have the human right to these things.
Right.
And I know we don't talk about that in a lot in the United States, but it's like, no, this is our human right. This is about self-determination.
Right.
And what that means for black communities, especially how we haven't been able to live in self-determined communities for so long.
Right.
And so the last kind of piece to reproductive justice is the human right to parent children in safe, sustainable, and healthy communities. And so with that, again, there's this community approach. So like with men, and I know we're talking about cisgender men, there's so much work for men to be a part of that. Like going back to like how people even get pregnant, healthy relationships, all of that. Like cisgender men need to know about their bodies too.
Right.
They need to know about like how, sexual health, how pregnancy works. And then like if they're with someone who has the capacity to give birth, like supporting them through the process. We know like what's going on with maternal mortality and how that's impacting black women. Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from pregnancy related like deaths.
Right. Just not being listened to.
Yeah, exactly. And so I saw this article, and some people, had some thoughts around it, but it was like this black man talking about how he wanted to get a group of black men together to it was a little bit like being a doer, but he was saying I really want to be supportive of my partner and understanding that this is this like familial community approach that is a part of our heritage and lineage to begin with. So when I think we make this separation, and we got to be clear, the state has made this separation. Right. That's not the legacy we come from. Right. Like with raising children, families, all of that, it's always been everybody. Right. So just to say that yes, cisgender men have a role, and I know sometimes it's tricky, I don't want to be in front, but if we think about it from that context, and also we're talking about self-determination and bodily autonomy, that includes all of us.
That's deep. That's This is why you're here. This is why you're here. We're gonna take a quick pause.
Okay.
This is fire right here. Right quick. Okay.
All right.
Nah, this is fire. So look, I'm finna be real ignorant right now.
All right. Okay.
Because I'm here to learn as a man, and also I'm here to ask all the brave questions that people don't want to ask, because we're in this counsel culture, and you can get counseled for trying to be informed, right? But this is a brave space. So you brought up one thing that I think when people think about reproductive justice, at least myself, is abortion. I think a lot of times the mass kind of awareness is always around abortion when it comes to reproductive justice from my lens. A lot of the stuff that you brought up, me personally, I've never connected it to reproductive justice until you just said, hey, it's more than just a choice, whether you pro-choice or not. It's all these other things, and I'm glad you broke that down. But this is a conversation, this is a kitchen table conversation I've had, and I want to bring it here with you when it comes about abortion. Now, we talk about pro-choice. Do man, or should man, when it comes to abortion, have some type of say with their partner on whether or not a child should or shouldn't be aborted?
Well, one, I will say some of the language first, because
correct the language, but that's me plainly talking as a kitchen table conversation, as that's the best way I know how to articulate it.
Yeah,
So help us. Yeah. Help me now. We out. Help me.
Yeah. So one, I was gonna say we don't use the language of the right. So so thinking about a fetus, that's what we're talking about, and then again, depending on the stage of pregnancy, some cells. Okay. And so, because I want to say that, because I think with the right, them throwing out pictures and stuff like that, all this misinformation. So we want to get down to that, because again, I know people still learn about the stages of pregnancy and gestation periods and all that stuff. So I want to say that. Okay. And so this comes up a lot actually. And I know there are different conversations online that folks kind of go back and forth. I saw this one thread. It was about somebody where they had a conversation. It was this both cis heterosexual couple, and the woman she didn't want to maintain a pregnancy, but the guy did. And so she was like, okay, I don't want to maintain a pregnancy, but I will, but I don't want anything I give away my rights or whatever. And there was this deep old conversation about it, because he was complaining. He was like, well, this is not fair, all that stuff. And people were saying a lot of interesting things. And so I was a part of training one time, and it was when I was working at Vanderbilt, and there was this guy who brought this up too, and he was just like, There's some complexities here because I think like people like because like we are talking about like what happens to a person's body, right? And you not being that person who goes through all these things. If you have to like, if you're maintaining a pregnancy, like all the stuff, and again on top of that, again think about Black people and maternal mortality, like death can be a result of that.
Right.
I think there are a lot more nuances there as well. Like I think that, you know, and again, it goes back into like how like we've talked about going back to this choice piece, because I think folks like you make it yourself and nobody else is consulted. You don't talk to nobody else, and it's like we know that's not true. Like
Right.
people are talking to like their partners, they're talking to family members, they're talking to other loved ones, friends, religious leaders, like all these other folks, because there's a lot that goes into making that decision. And so I would say that, again, it's very complicated. And I also like would say that in their needing to like those nuances and complexities, like people do take it to the other like extreme. Like they're like this legislation in different states that's coming out, and it's like the father, like he can sue, and all of these things. And again, going back to like if we all go back to this issue of like self-determination and bodily autonomy, and how we all need that. We need that individually and we need that collectively.
Right.
And again, what's going on there? Is there a matter? Is there like you trying to control something? You trying to control like somebody else's self-determination?
Right.
Or is it really about like, hey, how can we have a conversation around like I want children?
Right.
Is right now not the time?
Right.
Or what resources? What do we need? How can we work through this?
Right.
Which is it? And I think a lot of times, like right now, where we are at right now, is that control piece. Okay. And so, like, how do we get to this conversation where it's like, hey, like, I'm trying to hold all the things. I'm trying to think about, again, your self-determination, your autonomy. And I think that, like, as cis men, like, with just in history, like y'all just been socialized to control women, gender oppressed people. Right. And so I think that that's where some of it comes from. But I do get like this whole like, I think sometimes folks feel like, oh, like going back to your question around like, what's my role? And people don't feel like they're a part of this movement, which they really are. I think they feel like they can't ask questions or say things. They don't say anything, so they may not say, hey, actually, I want to have this conversation about maintaining this pregnancy, what it looks like, or how can we talk about children as a part of our relationship. Right. So that's how I think about it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you got me here reflecting about it. I just had it seemed like longer than it was, but I just had a son. He's gonna be 2 in May, or whatnot. And when that's when I started like just thinking about, man, what if I didn't want the child and my fiance Catherine, she did want the child, or vice versa, right? And what are those steps? What is the help, the assistance, without it being something contentious? Because I think, like you said, I think the state, separates people, right? Create these barriers. And I think more so for men, we look at it because, we only know one way to look at it, I think, and it's from like a really toxic place, I think, for most of us, unless we do the work.
We need some healing around that.
We need some healing around that. And then too, and this is just me speaking as a man too. I think now that we're seeing a lot of this conversation around like just equitability, around just equality, around just gender, right? And I think as men, and I'm gonna be honest, just myself, as men, it's like, okay, how far does that go when it comes to gender? Does that cross over into something like abortion? Where okay, if we're gonna be, have a equal share and equitable share on this decision, is that still in the lines of where we're trying to take society in a lot of different ways when it comes to gender, which women are probably more affected by in a negative way than men, because it's the foundation of how this country was built, right, and maintained, and just leaving women out of a lot of things. And so that's the lens that I hear a lot of my peers, my male peers, and that's a lens that I think I've thought about it in past, and a lot of stuff to this day. And so that's why I wanted to really bring it up. It's like, well, as from a man perspective, if my woman say, no, I don't want to have this baby, and it comes to the point, well, we done it together. We didn't, we made this baby together, because that's also used if the narrative is when the man doesn't want to be a part, it doesn't want the baby. It's like, well, now you can't back out now. I didn't do this by myself, right? Well, is that still applied to the woman if that decision is that she don't want it, I do. So those type of things from a male perspective is where my mind goes a lot of times. But I've never had the opportunity to sit down and talk to somebody like yourself that's in the sector, that understands policies and procedures, but also understand navigation to where if you're having those thoughts, or if it may be contentious around that, there's like healthy spaces, brave spaces, and healthy alternatives to where y'all ain't have to be butting heads, and really sit down and really debrief everything. So I'm glad you broke that down for us, because I really think it's scary for men to talk about it, because again, a lot of us have that, oh, this is not my place, this is not my thing, but which it is though. But this is separation that's been created, I think, and I hope more men and women allow men to be a part of that conversation in a healthy way going forward, after listening to some of the things you've talked about.
Yeah. I definitely would say, like, I always think about, like, embracing the gray. Like, I think we want, like, either A, B, C, D, black, white. And instead of, like, hey, like, again, like, how have our families been structured by the state? And again, I'm thinking about black families, black communities here. And that's why I was saying, like, about this healing and us, like, just really leaning into that, and thinking about, like, how to, like you said, like, have these conversations, and think about, like, oh, like, like when you were saying about, like, oh, like, this dead narrative, like, that's out there, like, oh, you left, like, something wrong with you, screw you, all of this stuff. And I think that we really got to check. That's what we're working against, is what I'm saying. As we, like, reclaim, like, so much, and really get into a space, like, how do I honor you as a person and your autonomy? How do I honor mine? How we, again, get to this place of, like, really thinking about self-determination, and that, like, that's not control, right? Like, that's, as a part of that, that's love, that's thinking about, like, again, there are complexities, there are nuances, and, like, also, like, having, like, these deep, sometimes, like, frustrating, complicated conversations. Very uncomfortable. It's been uncomfortable for so long, but I don't think the answer is, like, I ain't gonna touch it. I think it's, like, let me learn, let me think about this again. And let me, again, get to like really the root of this. Because sometimes you gotta really check yourself, like, like, this is bumping up against, like, I just want to do what I want to do, and I'm a man, and you've been socialized to do that, and how can we get to a different place together?
I know in this conversation we've had, and I, again, me being a man, we kind of spoke on kind of the control that man could have. They could be toxic. Now, is there also toxic controlness in that women could have in this space? And if so, what does that look like?
I would say that we've all been put into specific roles. So that's, like, the big thing about gender. is that like you a woman, and again it's very binary. Like we don't think about the expansiveness of gender.
Right.
It's like either man, woman. That's it. And it's like you as a woman, these are your expectations. This is your role. This is what you have to do. And like with that comes all these other things. And when I was back at Vanderbilt, like even though this was thinking about, and I will say that when we think about Black and other like women of color, like this experience of motherhood is very different than like that of white women, since chattel slavery.
Right. We're gonna get into that.
Yeah,
We're gonna get into that.
yeah.
It's coming up.
Yeah, and so when I was at Vanderbilt, I was reading about like, it was again from white women's perspective, but how like motherhood was just seen as like the thing you should reach. And even though that was for like white women, I think about like also the women in my family, other women, folks who are older than me, women who are older than me, who was like very much so like, oh, I'm supposed to be a mother. All this is on me. I get to shape everything around it, which again, that was like being told to them and put on them. Then with the man, it's just like, oh, okay. Like I said, going back to the deadbeat dad or whatever, like I'm present, maybe I'm not, and like when it comes to like raising children, like, even in the same household, I'm gonna go to work or whatever, come home, chill,
Right.
not even thinking about all the stuff like goes into taking care of children and stuff like that.
Right.
So I say all that to say, like, I think about it from that perspective. Like, I think in that, in like being like having those roles put on us like that, it did lead to some toxic stuff, some toxic elements, and us like again, like we've all been socialized how we've been socialized, and it could come out in like some very ugly ways. Like we were just talking about how these conversations can become very tense, and so, but I think like in everything I like to do, I ask the why. Why is this happening? Why are we at the point we're at? Like get into like really the root. And I think it goes back to those roles. And so if you're thinking about like a cis woman and like, like having children and all of that, I think it can like sometimes like seem like, like this may be like a toxic thing or like frustrations or whatever.
Right.
But again, like not thinking about like, okay, patriarchy, sexism has like put like, and again, it's like put all of us in these specific roles that become fixed in a lot of ways and you can't get out of it. And so when something is fixed like that, it's like, and you can't move. There's no flexibility. There's no fluidity. You stuck there, and it's like, again, like all that stuff comes out in like some nasty ways sometimes.
How do we? Because it from learning as we going through this, it seems like we all in a way have kind of been conditioned, right? We've been conditioned,
exactly,
and we just going along, right? With the conditioning. Well, hey, like my mama did this, her grandmama did that, my daddy did this, his granddaddy did that, or if he didn't know his daddy, his mama, this is what he figured out, and then this was, I guess, this worked kind of. I'm kind of an okay person, right? Is there support? Because me just having a son, right? Go to the hospital. They teach. They show you everything. As far as how to swaddle, right, bathe, if the woman is going to be breastfeeding, show her different breastfeeding techniques and latching and all of this stuff, right? And most of the time, the man, you just there, just watching, because even in that element, they're catering everything to the woman, like as if the man just, hey, this is your role, just
because
your role is there, right? Do you think some of these conversations that we're having and breaking down some of these roles and eliminate them, should that be happening? Where should that happen at? Should that happen, pre-birth, post-birth, in both? People go to marriage counseling before they get married, right? To figure out and like making sure everybody's on the morals and values on the same goal. Should there be something like that, or is there something like that future parents can or prospective parents can tap into?
those conversations should be happening like before you ever get in a relationship. Really, ideally, like your childhood and how
Right.
you raising your children.
Right.
Because, and I think about going back to like what I was saying. Like men come home, chill, whatever, and how like a lot like for like so long that was the case, and like not understanding, knowing like especially if it's a black mama, she don't went to work, she came home, now she got to cook, now she got to wash dishes, now she has to wash the clothes and stuff, get everybody to bed.
For the next
Exactly. And so, like, in that, it's like, well, one, like, the messages that kids receive in that. So that's why I said it has to start, like, way before that. And why aren't we teaching, like, everybody, like, how can you be, like, how can you sustain yourself as an adult? All of these things you need to know. Like, everybody, like, of all across genders need to know how to take care of themselves. And that makes its way into the conversation around parenthood. Because, yes, like, if, like, you had the baby and, like, breastfeeding, like, yes, there's, like, a different, role within that, but it's not that like there isn't support. Like folks can definitely the person is pumping, but there's support in it.
Right.
Again, I just think going back to those expectations and roles and how like you said, we've been conditioned.
How we learn.
Yeah.
Like,
how do we
unlearn
it?
that?
Yeah. And it just takes a lot of work. Like it takes it's really like a communal thing that has to happen. And I, see people like, different conversations, like how they're like, this how I'm thinking about my childhood and what I learned. Or like, let's say it was like, the brother, he's like, all these things my sister was expected to do or whatever, and how that impacted me. Because that's something, too, we need to talk about. Like, patriarchy has a harmful impact on men,
Yeah.
And so, I've seen people, talk about like, this is my healing journey and therapy and all of this. And so like, I know that in a relationship it's a partnership. So this ain't all on one person with taking care of a child. That I know that it's like me too. And I need to like, again, think about like, yeah, maybe at times like the role will be a little different. This is my child too. And I'm going to take care of my child as well.
Right.
And like wash clothes and, help with the homework and stuff like that.
Right.
And so like, ideally it would be like how we raise our children differently, but like now I know we all here, but that conversation like those things should happen before a relationship. But while in a relationship, you do need to think about that. Like, do we want to have children? How are we going to think about parents and how we're going to co-parent? Like, how are we going to do these things together? How are we going to split this up before the baby gets here? Because like, I know all that becomes so complicated after the baby's here and can lead to people breaking up, all that stuff. So it has to happen before.
You got me thinking. You got me thinking of something I'm proud of myself. And I'm like, I got to give myself my flowers. I'm going to give myself my flowers because this is what I did, though. This is what I did. As my fiance, Catherine, shout out to Catherine, black queen. But I think I know for sure, I think she was like subconsciously like trying to take on those roles, right? Mm-hmm. And I had to like say, hey, hey, I'm here. I can, what I'm saying? I can do these things too. Like outside of breastfeeding, like I can do some of this stuff too. You don't have to put it all on you. And as you thinking, I caught it like in the moment, like, hey, this ain't the 50s, this ain't 30s or 40s and way back, right? I ain't gotta just come on chill and you got the baby, you do everything I eat at the table, and this ain't those times. And I think like that's a great role that men could play, just reflecting on it as you were saying it, like, hey, like if you see your spouse, or your partner, doing a lot of the like just subconsciously doing a lot of the work, you could step in and say, hey, now I'm capable as just as you to do some of these things. Let me let's do that. And so I had to give myself my flowers in that because I did that because I try to be intentional around this and not like in respect the relationship and making sure like, hey, like we don't have to have gender roles, right? I don't have to, do this or do that.
Traditional
ones, right? And if you want to create those yourself within your partnership, that's fine. I think, and that's healthy. But I think a lot of times we just subconsciously just get into that mode, just unknowingly, right? And so I gotta bring them up. I really don't want to, but I gotta bring them up. Kevin Samuels.
I don't even really listen to him, but go ahead.
I don't either, but he's, people senior stuff. I don't either, and what he's made me think about that I want to ask you is there still healthy spaces where it's not toxic, where it's not harmful, where these traditional gender roles that still existed, that it still exists, but or there's just real traditional that, hey, men did this, women did that, and that's that. Is there still a place for that in today's time? To where if you're a woman and all you want to do is like, hey, I want to come in and just clean, cook, do all these traditional things, and as a man, I just want to pay the bills, go to work, and have to and do nothing else. Could that still exist today? Is that healthy? Because he talks about all of that. What does he call it? High value man stuff, and this is what they want, and the women come over there and say, hey, I want a high value man, but I don't want to play the role that a high value man may want me to play, and X, Y, and Z. But I just had to ask you about that because we had to. I had because I'm gonna be the one. I'm gonna be that person right now to get it on out there because we have you here, and I want to take advantage of that and take advantage of your perspective and what we can learn and change not only my perspective but also people that's hopefully watching and listening about how they think about these things in these conversations.
So with that, well, one, like, the first question that comes to mind is, like, who really benefited in those, like, that traditional role, like, the setup, let's call it that. Right. This has been, we see this on social media too. Like, look, we can take it all the way back to our great grandma, right, and let's say, yeah, she cooked, she cleaned, and, she had, children, 5, 6, maybe more children. And, people like, oh, they don't make them like they used to. They, my great-grandparents were married 40, 50 years. Well, first of all, like, let's even think about that. Like, I think sometimes we read into, like, what's possible now into, like, 50, 60 years ago. So our great-grandparents, like, we thinking about a day when, like, women couldn't have a bank account. Right. Without a man. Right. Couldn't work. Couldn't do those things. Yeah, right. And so, like, we're really, like everything was structured where it was this big dependence on men. So, like I think we have to think about those things, like, what was going on where, like, this was the case or whatever. Right. And then also, too, sometimes we, like, misremember, maybe we don't know, because, like, even in those situations, like, Black women have always worked outside the household. We didn't have the luxury of being, like, this housewife. And I think sometimes we, like, oh, no, this was definitely the thing, when it's like, no, like, Black women domestic workers and, cleaning people's houses, white people's houses, and have to come home and still do that stuff. Right. And like you saying, the daddy, like, oh, I'm just chill, whatever. Both of them were working. Right. Both of them were working, though. Right. And so let's think about the impact of that. Okay. Because, like, great-grandma also had all these conditions, health-wise, and probably was depressed. And they didn't have a language then, or it was just really, really stigmatized. Because, right. It wasn't like people had therapy in the 40s, 50s, like... We just not trying right, to... Right, exactly, exactly. Just internalized it. Yeah, exactly. So when I think about, like, these traditional roles where it's kind of like this... I think we're like, oh, like, it's equal. But it's like, no, there's an imbalance coming into it. The fact that, like, let's get on the same page. Like, even when we take it back to the 40s and 50s, Black women were working outside of the household. They were domestic workers having to do all this stuff for somebody else's family, come home having to do all those other things. That's not It's not
Right.
like, again, it's not this whole, well, she was just cooking and cleaning and stuff like that.
Right.
But let's even say, like, that still, like, let's say there was like a scenario situation was like, well, no, actually, my grandma, she did. Like, she was a housewife. Why, with that too, like, how, like, it, in our field we call, reproductive labor, but, in movements is reproductive labor. How, like, even with this whole thing, well, like, what if, like, the man just want to go work and pay the bills, and the woman, she could stay home and clean and stuff like that. First of all, I don't see that as work too. It
Right.
is.
Right.
So, like, again, going back to a situation where, like, you had to go and work outside the house and then come home and do all those things, that still is work.
Right.
And somebody, like, because as we think about, like, stuff with, like, domestic violence and stuff, and how, like, financial stuff is a part of that, like, again, somebody still having, like, this sense of control or whatever. Like, I don't think, like, I think that some people, I talk about it with folks, they're like, oh, feminism, you will feminist and stuff like that. And, like, ugh, like, women don't want to be women and all this stuff. And I was like,
those are the narratives. That's
and
why
I'm
we
like,
here to break it down.
I'm like, yeah, people don't want to be doormats. People don't want to,
Right.
like, again, I gotta, like, cook clean, no type of, thank you, no type of gratitude, and then, like, be on my way to my early death,
Right.
because of, like, the impact of that. And again, how it's still patriarchy that's structuring that.
Right.
So what I hear in those, like, well, can we go back to these traditional gender roles? It's like, can we go back to a time where, like, there's this, like, I can, you do you, and I'm like, there's disrespect that's a part of that. There's
Right.
not this, like, seeing you in your full humanity. And so I think that's how I hear it. But I think if people are saying, like, hey, can we have these conversations about, like, how we want to divide up, like, household labor?
Right.
Yes, but again, making sure that we're checking for, like, is there this imbalance? And, like, going back to, like, who initially did all these things benefit? And again, historically, it was men.
Right.
And so I just can't get that out of my head.
Right. No. That's why and I hope the men are listening and tuning in, and that's why, like, this is a discussion for women, for a woman to be involved in and to lead. Damn, I'm learning so much, and you got me thinking right now about, like, the benefits of that and who would benefit it, and why it makes sense why many men you still hear want that back, right? Or want that type of woman that'll play that type of role.
Yeah. Instead of asking, again, going back to, like, how can I, like, how can we all learn how to take care of ourselves?
Right.
Well, like, everybody knows how to cook and stuff, instead of, like,
Right.
can you do this and take care of me type of sometimes mentality.
And you hear this a lot. Well, I say I hear this a lot. You probably hear this a lot too, because in the black community, because we're black. And it's one of them things that you had me thinking that I never really thought about. Like, I hear it all the time too. Just, man, they don't make them like they used to. Black women used to do this. Black women used to do that. I need to get another type of woman because black women are not doing X, Y, and Z anymore. And a lot of it is, I think, a lot of it is, one, black women and women in general have more opportunities, right? Can have the same type of jobs, better jobs, and make more money. Be the most educated people in the country, right? And it seems like, with all that being true, like, men and black men probably subconsciously don't like it. It's threatening, and that's what you got me thinking about. Because and I don't know if this is still true. This a couple years ago, but I was seeing that black women are not having as many kids as they used to, right? I think they maybe be averaging like one child, maybe 1.5, something like that. But, like, the reproductive community of the black women is going down, and a lot of this is because they staying in school, focusing on careers and all these other great things, instead of just having kids, like oh, you supposed to. And that just really got me reflecting on, damn, like, what does that say about us as men, especially black men? We say we want to see our black women win and champion them, But at the same time, it's like, but y'all need to be, still do all that great stuff. Go to the doctor's office, lawyer's office, organize, do all these, be an executive director. But still, I need you to still become a home. I would still like you to cook, clean, and all these things. We ask so much of y'all.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's what it has me thinking, because I wanted to say, like, going back to that, like, can people have conversations about, like, yeah, what works for our relationship, but it's not being like you supposed to. And I think that's what I'm getting at, because like there might be a woman, like, she loves to cook, she really good at it, and that's what's been discussed, versus like, oh no, I'm expecting you, like, if you don't know how to do it, something wrong or whatever. Versus, and I'm like, well, you don't know how to cook either. I guess we're not eating. Or, like, there's a negotiation there. And I think, again, going back to this traditional gender roles, I think there, again, was like, you need to do this. It's expectation versus, like, let's have a conversation about what works for us. It is not, like, tied to this, like, you have to, or, because you this or whatever. I did want to speak to something you said, because I think this is something that we all should think more about. And you brought up, like, oh, Black women aren't having this many children, and also, like, that's like the U.S., like, the birth rate has significantly declined. Like, I think it's been the lowest in so many years, like over the past 5 or so years. And so one thing, and I think this is a really big piece of reproductive justice, what I was saying earlier, like, what are all the resources you need to, like, one, thrive as a person, but also, like, for your community to thrive and for you to have children. And how, like, with the state, like, a lot of, even where we are now, even with the pandemic, like, people losing jobs, people, like, women are leaving the workforce and not having just access to the resources they need, like childcare, all of these things, that, again, go back to, like, somebody's, like, am I going to maintain a pregnancy? Do, like, again, in this larger context, like, these decisions are being made in this larger context. But I don't know, I'm really just thinking about, like, resources, because I think that sometimes we miss that, because I think and that's sometimes the danger of individualizing some stuff. And it's like, like, why don't we have, like, these resources? Like, why, like, because I'm always like, if a person, like, if you do not want to be pregnant, if you don't, like, want to maintain a pregnancy, going back to self-determination, you need all the resources available to you to, like, be able to terminate that pregnancy. That, like, especially, and I think there's this conversation too, like, within Black communities, and some folks, just say all kind of stuff they've seen, but, like, being able to exercise that type of self-determination is something we never had, the ability to do, or, like, often it's been taken from us. And to, like, have control over your body, like, is key. And also too, like, just want to make sure, like, I speak to that other piece around, like, how, like, the government is not providing resources to folks, like, with reproductive justice framework. Again, it's like the right to have a child, that's, a part of it, as well as the right not to have a child, and parent the children that we have in safety, healthy, and sustainable communities. And so just to say that, like, people need resources across the board. And I just think about that, like, how, like, climate change, all these things that are happening, where, like, folks are just like, wow, like, like, and, like, all the, like, taking of, like, resources, austerity, all of that. So that's just something that, like, I was like, yeah, I think about that, like, people, like, with resources, that's so important.
And I want to throw this at you and see how this ties into resources. And this is, hey y'all, I'm taking all the hits for everybody today, because I've said this myself. I'm being vulnerable. I said this myself, and I want to see, is this toxic? What I'm thinking or what I'm saying? That, because of many people's circumstances, when I say people, women, circumstances, I ain't gonna say just women. I'll take that back. Couples, partners, when they are pregnant, about to have a baby, I've looked at people's circumstances and said, hey, I don't think they should be having a child because of their current social, economic, living conditions, or what have you. And me thinking that I'm thinking about, hey, is that the best environment to be bringing in a new human being, a child, into the world? And I'm pretty sure we've all heard that. Hey, it's a phrase like everybody ain't meant to have kids, that type of thing. Is that toxic thinking on my part? Is that wrong? What is that like when I see with my eyes like maybe you shouldn't have that baby because of these other social things that that may potentially affect the livelihood, the health of that child.
I would say you're looking at it from a position that you've been taught to look at it from, and that's like
Give it to me straight.
You've been taught to like who we are trying to push on people like our narratives are like who should be a parent, right. But that comes from the state. Just again, like remembering that like the state has done that in so many ways to like Black communities, indigenous, other communities of color, like determining who gets to be a parent. Right. And it's not like this conversation around like, okay, if you want to be a parent, what is everything you need and how we can ensure, again, it's a community, right, that you have everything you need in order to be a parent. Like, it's like, that's not like what we're talking about. Right. It's all this judgment and stigma instead of like, hey, like, like, again, like, how can we come in and make sure there's support and that, and all the different things that come up. Like, I'm not sure if you follow Moms for Housing. It's an Oakland group.
I do. I know of it.
Yeah.
I know
yeah.
of it.
So, people had a lot to say about that. They were like, oh, you got children, you don't got no housing, like, you a bad parent, like, your children should be taken away from you. I'm like, hey, housing is a human right. These are, like, we don't see these things as human rights violations, and I definitely think we should. Right. And so instead of being like, oh, I don't think you should be a parent or whatever, it's just like, okay, let me take a step back and, like, think about, like, one, like, all the things that are going on in your life. And I think that, like, there is this piece, and I think sometimes for folks what they're really trying to get at is, like, it's right now the right time. But again, like, thinking about, like, do we get to make that decision? We don't. But really what it is like, what really it comes down to is, like, this is what a good parent is. Like, putting this thing on a pedestal. Like, a good parent is X, Y, Z, or whatever. Right. And that actually, in a lot of ways, can be tied back to white supremacy. I don't think we think about that. And that's just so key to this conversation. Right. And in a lot of ways for me, like, how these things tie back to, like, how, like, white supremacy has structured parenting, has structured so much about our lives. And so that's why I say, like, you've been taught, like, white supremacy has taught us to be like, oh, let's do this thing because, like, this person, like, is poverty, that's that issue, or this thing, or let's say it's substance use that they're struggling with. Like, nobody's thinking about treatment, nobody's thinking about, okay, what led to this. It's just like, oh, like, you this bad person, we gonna do this, you don't get to be a parent. And, like, again, the state has always done that. They have always decided for folks who gets to be a parent.
And again, everybody, I'm taking it here for everybody. So I hope y'all picking these up so y'all don't have to, look crazy when y'all ask this stuff. But you got me thinking that, so naturally, and this is me, I've said, man, maybe, maybe you should get an abortion, and this might be telling, me another guy, or maybe even a female friend of mine, like, hey, maybe you should think about abortion. Maybe that's not the right advice, or maybe that ain't the only solution, right? And I think a lot of times that, like, we think the only solution when we don't have those kind of projected social resources that we believe we should have, is like, well, let me abort the child until I'm ready, or projecting abortion on people, when the question probably should be like, well, okay, what are resources that we could tap into, or what are some things that we can, or conversations that we can have with people that know how to navigate this situation, And maybe the lack of that type of awareness is why we only think that the solution to fix the issue that we believe is an issue is getting an abortion.
Mm-hmm. And I would say it's holding both of those, because like I was saying earlier, like my vision for a liberated world, and other like reproductive justice organizers and activists talk about this, is like, abortion being accessible, people like, it's covered, there's like no barriers to it. Because again, going back to self-determination, we got to see it from that level. Going back to bodily autonomy, that should always be an option like for folks. We should I'll like make it more accessible and remove barriers, because that's like where we at now. It's so many barriers. And with that, also, again, if we live into the reproductive justice framework, it holds all of that. It's like making that accessible, like contraception, all the things people need, the totality of their reproductive lives. Because you know what? Like, right now might not be the time, but I may want to be a parent later. So making sure I have access to doulas, somebody to be there, a support person to like help hold that process. If I want a midwife, like going back to the conditions under which one gives birth. Okay, maybe I want a home birth. That was the thing, back like thinking about the 1800s with like midwives, like, providing all of the healthcare, like in communities, especially thinking about Black communities, like, delivering babies, but also they did abortions too. And so, but now people are like, oh, just go to a hospital. That's the only option. Oh, and the only option is to get a C-section. And a lot of that is coerced, and people don't even think about it. So it's like that should be a part of the conversation as well. Like we have to hold all of those things, and not saying like, oh, like if this is this, then we don't need that. It's like, no, we need all of these things to be, again, I keep going back to self-determined people and like living in self-determined communities, but for liberation, like all of this is important. And again, going back to, like if somebody wants to be a parent and is thinking about parenthood, we should give them all the resources that they need in order to do that. And so we have to hold all of it and not take one piece out. Like it's about all of it. The framework is about all of it.
Damn, I'm learning so much. Like, are you schooling me right now? I'm sweating. Like, damn, what did I just say? But you, like, this. I really hope people are really self-reflecting on their thoughts they've had about this, and that's what I'm like trying to intentionally do in this conversation. Be honest with myself and say, what have I thought about this process? From a man's perspective, right? How have I thought about it, and what can I learn at this very moment, and just bravely ask, right? How does reproductive justice look for Black women compared to white women, and where does biases, racism, discrimination, structural racism, white supremacy play into that?
Yeah. So again, this goes back so far. Like the reproductive experiences, like again, just taking Black women versus white women, have always been women of color overall. I actually teach this reproductive justice, or co-lead this reproductive justice class at Vanderbilt now. And we're having these same conversations. Like they just read a chapter of a book, Reproductive Justice and Introduction, by one of the founders of the Reproductive Justice Framework and Movement, Loretta Ross. But, she was going through, like, again, during chattel slavery, how, like, Black women, enslaved Black women were bred to have children, how they had to work up until the point of labor. They had, there was no prenatal care or anything like that, no type of, like, support around their pregnancy and delivery. But even still in that, there was resiliency. So I want to say that, like, even, like, in faced with those like tough conditions, like Black women still have like resisted, and that's how we got the reproductive justice framework. So pairing that with white women and like their pregnancies, and thinking about how black women, like had like with the breastfeeding, like in breastfeeding white babies and stuff, and not being
Right.
able to breastfeed their own children. So just to say, like, it starts like far back. And if we think about indigenous communities, like the removal of land, we call all of this reproductive oppression.
Right.
And so, like indigenous women, like also like having their reproduction controlled, and, the taking of indigenous children and putting them in boarding schools and all of that.
Right.
So like fast forward to today. So a few issues come to mind. I've already talked about maternal mortality and how that issue impacts black women, and like black women are dying.
Right.
Like
Right.
that's
Like it's
the
dangerous.
bottom line.
It's dangerous to give
Yeah.
birth. Like
And
it's life
so,
threatening.
and it's racism. Like
Right.
like people ask like, why is this happening? And for so long it didn't get the attention that it deserved. And now there are groups like Black Mamas Alliance, other groups, like there's a Black Maternal Health Week that happens in April to uplift those narratives, and the availability of doulas. Like my organization is like working on legislation to ensure like that more people have access to doulas, and doulas are compensated for their work. So we think about on that front, but also thinking about what's going on with abortion, because there is a lot that's going on with abortion. So Saturday was the 49th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, and a lot of folks are saying like, is this gonna be the last one? And so with these abortion like restrictions and bans, like we, Texas, we saw that, and with Mississippi, and like those two, cases, they'll be heard by the Supreme Court. They'll give a decision within the next few months. And something that we've always talked about is, one, again, going back to like how this is linked back to criminalization.
Right.
And who's more likely to be criminalized? Black and other communities of color.
Right.
And so these abortion bans and restrictions harm black women, black folks more, than like white women.
Right.
Because thinking about like going back to what I was saying, like, like the barriers, there's so many barriers, so many restrictions in Tennessee, like waiting period, all of this stuff, like bills that come out, every session.
Right.
And those restrictions and bans disproportionately impact black women,
Right.
black folks, communities of color. And so just again not having access across the board. And with white women who like white middle class women, like they'll always be able to access that and can like get their insurance, like private insurance, to cover it and stuff
Right.
like that. But thinking about like black women, like that's not the case.
Right.
I think some other issues that are coming to mind, like, and like in the vein of reproductive issues, like I read this article a few years ago about like fibroids, and then also cervical cancer. So fibroids, like black women are disproportionately impacted by fibroids. Fibroids can have a huge impact on fertility. And so, going back to like if someone wants to have children and they're not able to, and again, like these kind of like questions like, well, why like black women disproportionately impacted and they're not like receiving the treatment that they need, going back to racism,
Right.
like overall, and then in the healthcare system. And then I read this article about, I believe it was this community, this town, I want to say in Alabama. If not Alabama, it was Mississippi. But it was this town where like all these black women were dying of cervical cancer. And cervical cancer is highly preventable. Like if you get pap smears every, year, like they can like catch it early, is what I'm saying. And it can, they can get it uncontrolled. And they found, they were like, well, like, these black women are living in a state like they like are poor. They don't have private insurance. They're relying on Medicaid. But guess what? They, the legislators did not expand Medicaid. And in Tennessee, we didn't expand Medicaid either. And again, how like black women are more likely to be on Medicaid and like not have those like preventative like reproductive sexual health services covered. So anyway, those are just, some things like that come to mind, but it's so historic.
Right.
And like black women, like last we want to add, like when it comes to the child welfare system, we call it the family regulation system after Dorothy Roberts. Like so many black children get taken from their families. And like you could just like read through like all the little things, like a child, like let's say like maybe bump his head against the wall or something, and the mama like immediately, the parents immediately took the baby to the hospital, and then now it's like because you a black mama. Because,
Right.
like, again, going back to who gets to be a parent,
Right.
The state has decided black folks shouldn't be parents.
Right.
So it's like now, like, you tried to harm your child. Now we're going to do a DCS investigation, and we're going to take your child away from you. And so that's another reason. So, again, like, just tying it all together. And, again, like, ultimately, going back to the last piece with reproductive justice, like so many children are being taken away, and that's impacting black women more than white women.
Now look, if y'all ain't blown away, I don't know what to tell you. I really don't know what to tell you. Look, we can sit here and talk about this another.
I know
it's
a lot I can say.
It's a lot, and I want to keep bringing you back because I know it's stuff always happening, and there's people like me that ain't tapped in. But now that I know you have a relationship with you, building one, and know more about what's going on, because one, I need to do some self work, and like. You can be my accountability partner but no, it's just I need, because you have me thinking now, and I hope everybody else is, especially men and black men, are thinking like, oh shit, like I didn't got a lot of stuff wrong. At least be open enough to admit it, right? And if you just want to lie to yourself, well, hey, maybe you get it down the road. But I want to leave you with the last words. Like, what else can you tell us of how to be allies in this? How to direct people for support, how to get support ourselves if we need it, and reproductive justice.
Yeah. Well, I am going to plug my own organization's work. So one, like I said, like we are really like just deeply committed to the reproductive justice framework and uplifting all of these issues. Again, thinking about like how can we protect abortion, increase abortion access, how we can ensure that like folks have access to doulas and other like resources for maternal care, and all of these other issues. How can we ensure that like the family regulation system that's a part of the defund work. We need to defund it too. Like these families need to be kept together. So in all of that, we have like every year we have a day on the Hill, and so a day on the Hill is specifically lifting up mamas and mamas and caregivers of all genders. And so that's February 23rd. And you can go, on our socials, Healthy and Free Tennessee. And so we're asking folks to come out, like learn about the issues. Like one thing I didn't talk a lot about and something that we've been working on is this anti-shackling legislation. So, pregnant people in Tennessee are shackled during labor and delivery. And like that's a very dehumanizing thing. And so like other states have passed anti-shackling legislation. We want Tennessee to be one of them. And so at this day on the Hill, we're going to talk about these issues that are coming up, and just like the state of like reproductive justice in Tennessee when it comes like policy wise. So definitely encourage people to like check out that day on the Hill. Definitely look us up, Healthy and Free Tennessee, to find out more about our work. And I think just further with that, like going back to just how we started this conversation with reproductive justice, like it is like it encompasses so much. I think that like we like just a lot of folks, people I talk to, they're like, oh, I didn't know about this. I thought it was just this one piece. When it's like all of these pieces, and it's about like our human rights. It's about our self-determination. It includes cisgender men. It's about like it incorporates all of that. And so like it's a framework that like we like lift up and think, it's like gonna get us to liberation, help us build power, and that like we need to be paying more attention and not just see these issues as separate, but like reproductive justice allows us to see like all of this stuff is connected. So like I'm thinking about all of this like before I can even think about like all these other things with like having children and what have you. So just want to uplift that like reproductive justice is a very dope
It is.
framework.
No, it is dope. It is dope. No, it is dope. And it's even it's more dope now that you didn't brought it to deep dish. You know what I'm saying? So I appreciate you.
Yeah.
I can't wait to have you back to talk about this more and whatever's currently going on. So thank you for your time and being available to do this.
Yeah, thank you.
No, you're welcome.